The automatic doors of San Diego International Airport slid open with a soft hiss, releasing a wave of recycled air into the bright California morning. Margaret Caldwell stepped through, her sensible orthopedic shoes making barely a sound against the polished terminal floor. At 78 years old, she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned that bones don't heal as quickly as they once did. She was unremarkable in every visible way. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple bun, wisps escaping around her weathered face. A faded navy cardigan hung loosely over a white blouse that had seen better days. Her slacks were practical, purchased from a department store clearance rack. The only luggage she carried was a small carry-on roller bag and a worn leather messenger bag that sagged against her hip, its strap leaving a familiar groove in her shoulder. To the hurried travelers rushing past, she was invisible. Just another elderly woman, probably visiting grandchildren in Washington, maybe attending a funeral. The type of passenger who'd need help lifting her bag into the overhead compartment, who'd take too long boarding, who'd ask the flight attendant 3 times where her seat was located. They were all wrong. Margaret moved through security with practiced efficiency, her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. She wasn't as technologically helpless as her appearance suggested. The TSA agent barely glanced at her ID, waving her through with the bored expression of someone who'd processed 10,000 faces that morning alone. At gate 27, she found a seat away from the crowds, settling into the hard plastic chair with a soft exhale. Her knees protested, they always did these days. Arthritis, the doctor said. Souvenir of age. She reached into her messenger bag, fingers brushing past a dog-eared paperback novel, a package of tissues, and a prescription pill bottle until they found what she was looking for. A photograph creased and faded. A young man in a Navy flight suit grinned at the camera, his arm around a younger version of herself. Both wore aviator sunglasses. Both wore wings. "Still miss you, Tom," she whispered, tracing his face with her thumb before tucking the photo away. Flight 2847 to Washington Dulles now boarding all passengers, the gate agent announced with rehearsed cheerfulness. Margaret stood slowly, letting the families with small children board first, then the business travelers who'd paid for priority boarding. She waited until general boarding was called, then joined the queue, her ticket indicating seat 12A, window seat, just as she'd requested. She always chose window seats. Old habits. The jet bridge seemed longer than she remembered from her last flight 2 years ago. Or maybe she was just slower. A flight attendant greeted her at the aircraft door with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome aboard. Can I help you with your bag, ma'am?" "I've got it, thank you," Margaret replied, her voice soft but firm. She'd been lifting equipment far heavier than a carry-on bag when this flight attendant was still in diapers. She found row 12 and paused, assessing the overhead compartment situation like she was calculating angles of attack. With a smooth motion that belied her age, she hefted her roller bag up and secured it. Years of muscle memory didn't just disappear. Settling into 12A, she fastened her seatbelt and turned toward the window. The tarmac stretched out below, shimmering in the late morning heat. Ground crew moved around the aircraft with choreographed precision. A fuel truck disconnected its hose. Baggage carts zipped past like insects. "Excuse me, ma'am." A businessman, mid-40s, expensive suit, Bluetooth earpiece still blinking in his ear, gestured to seat 12B. Margaret shifted her legs to let him pass. He immediately opened his laptop, already ignoring her existence. "Perfect." More passengers filed in. A young couple arguing quietly about whether they'd remembered to lock their apartment. A mother wrestling with a toddler who wanted no part of staying seated. A college student with oversized headphones who collapsed into 12C without acknowledging either of his roommates. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 2847 with service to Washington Dulles," the lead flight attendant announced. "We'll be pushing back from the gate shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and all electronic devices are in airplane mode." Margaret's hand moved to her wrist, an unconscious gesture she'd repeated 10,000 times. Her fingers traced the small tattoo there, faded blue ink that most people never noticed. A pair of wings. Below them, the numbers 2. Afghanistan, 2002, a lifetime ago. The businessman beside her finally glanced over, catching sight of the tattoo. His eyes lingered for just a moment before returning to his laptop. He probably thought it was some sort of memorial tattoo, a tribute to a grandchild's birth year or something equally sentimental. He had no idea. The engines began their familiar whine, building from a whisper to a roar. Margaret felt it in her chest, that old sensation, that primal response to the promise of flight. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, began its slow taxi toward the runway. She pulled her messenger bag closer, unzipped an inner pocket, and withdrew a small, worn challenge coin. One side bore the insignia of the 58th Fighter Squadron. The other was engraved with a single word, Widow 6. Her call sign, her identity, her past. She rolled the coin between her fingers, watching the sunlight catch its edges. Nobody on this flight knew. Nobody ever knew anymore. She was just an old woman taking up space, probably anxious about flying, probably. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. The aircraft turned onto the runway, engines building to full power. Margaret closed her eyes as the acceleration pressed her back into her seat. 37 years since she'd last felt this from the pilot's seat. 24 years since her last combat mission. But today, somewhere over Nevada, the past was about to catch up with her. The fighter pilots had found out she was flying, and they were coming to pay their respects. Flight 2847 had been airborne for 93 minutes when everything changed. Margaret had been dozing, her head resting against the cool window, when the businessman beside her suddenly gasped. His laptop slid off his tray table, forgotten, as he pressed his face against the window behind her. "Holy, is that what I think it is?" Margaret's eyes snapped open, her body instantly alert, a reflex trained into her decades ago that retirement had never quite extinguished. She turned toward the window, following his gaze. There, impossibly close, flying in perfect formation with the commercial airliner, was an F-35 Lightning II fighter jet. Her breath caught. The stealth fighter was close enough that she could see the pilot's helmet, the American flag painted on the tail, the weapon's pylons tucked beneath its angular body. It held position with supernatural precision, matching the airliner's speed exactly, staying just off the left wing. "There's another one," someone shouted from across the aisle. Margaret's head whipped to the right. A second F-35 had taken position off the starboard side, mirroring its twin. Both fighters flew with the kind of precision that only came from hundreds of hours in the cockpit. The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers unbuckled, rushing to windows. Phone cameras emerged, pressed against glass. Children pointed excitedly while their parents' faces showed concern bordering on panic. The college student in 12C had ripped off his headphones, his eyes wide. "Are we being hijacked?" A woman's voice trembled from several rows back. "Is there a threat? Why are military jets escorting us? Oh my God, are we going to be okay?" Margaret sat perfectly still, her hands gripping the armrests. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear but from something else. Recognition, realization, dread mixed with pride. They knew. Somehow they knew she was on this flight. The intercom crackled to life, and the captain's voice filled the cabin. But it wasn't the usual smooth, reassuring tone pilots used to calm nervous passengers. There was something different in his voice, something that sounded like awe. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell speaking from the flight deck." He paused, and in that pause Margaret could hear him composing himself. "I need everyone to remain calm and return to your seats immediately. There is no emergency. I repeat, there is no emergency." The cabin quieted, but anxiety hung thick in the air. "The two F-35 fighters you see outside our aircraft are United States Air Force jets conducting what they've called a routine escort. However," another pause, longer this time, "they have specifically requested permission to render honors to a passenger aboard this flight." Silence. Then pandemonium. "Who? What passenger? Honors, what does that mean?" The businessman turned to Margaret, his executive composure cracking. "Ma'am, do you know what's happening?" Margaret couldn't answer. Her throat had closed. Her eyes burned with tears she hadn't shed in years. She stared out at the F-35, at the pilot who held formation with effortless skill, and she absolutely knew, that young pilot knew exactly who she was. 3 rows back, a man in his 60s stood abruptly. He wore a Marine's cap and an old service jacket. His eyes swept the cabin with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent a career evaluating threats and assets. "There's a military VIP on this plane," he announced, his voice carrying authority that silenced the nervous chatter. "Those fighters don't escort civilians for fun. Someone important is on this aircraft." Passengers began looking around, scrutinizing each other. A few glanced at the Marine veteran himself, assuming he was the honored passenger. Others looked toward first class, expecting to see a general in uniform. No one looked at the elderly woman in seat 12A. Margaret's hands trembled. She interlaced her fingers, squeezing tight, trying to maintain composure. The challenge coin in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She wanted to disappear, to become invisible again, to be just another passenger. But the F-35s weren't letting that happen. "Attention all passengers," the captain's voice returned, and now Margaret could clearly hear emotion breaking through his professional veneer. "I've just received additional communication from the fighter escort. They've asked me to convey that they are honored to fly alongside an American hero today." The cabin exploded with whispers. "Who is it?" "An American hero." The flight attendant, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, began walking slowly down the aisle, her gaze sweeping across passengers. She carried a tablet, clearly checking something against the manifest. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. The attendant stopped at row 12. Her eyes dropped to the tablet, then rose to meet Margaret's face. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. "Ma'am," the flight attendant whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "are you Margaret Caldwell?" Every passenger within earshot turned. The businessman beside Margaret jerked as if electrocuted. Margaret nodded slowly, unable to speak. The flight attendant's eyes filled with tears. She touched her hand to her heart. "My father served in Afghanistan. He told me stories about Widow 6. He said you saved his unit when," her voice broke. "He said you were the bravest pilot he ever saw." "Widow 6, the Marine veteran's voice cut through the cabin like a gunshot. He was standing now at attention. "Widow 6 is on this aircraft." The name rippled through the cabin like a shockwave. "Who's Widow 6? "Wait, I know that name. It's a call sign, a military call sign." The college student in 12C was already frantically typing into his phone. "Oh my God," he breathed, his screen illuminating his face. "Widow 6, Colonel Margaret Caldwell, first female combat ace. 5 confirmed kills, Distinguished Flying Cross. Afghanistan 2002, she's a legend." He turned to stare at Margaret with the wonder, usually reserved for rock stars or presidents. The businessman beside her had gone pale. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, I didn't realize." Margaret finally found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "No one's supposed to know." Outside the window, the F-35 held its position, steady and sure. Through the cockpit glass, Margaret could see the pilot's helmet turn slightly toward the airliner. Toward her. And then the pilot raised one gloved hand in a crisp salute. Margaret's vision blurred with tears. Slowly, trembling, she raised her hand and returned the salute, a gesture she hadn't made in 20 years. The cabin fell absolutely silent. Everyone watched the elderly woman in the worn cardigan, hands shaking, tears streaming down weathered cheeks, saluting a fighter jet at 35,000 feet. And in that moment they understood. They were flying with a warrior. In the cockpit of Flight 2847, Captain Robert Mitchell's hands were slick with sweat against the control yoke. In 22 years of commercial flying, he'd never experienced anything like this. His co-pilot, First Officer Jennifer Hayes, sat rigid in her seat, her eyes flicking between the instruments and the F-35 holding formation off their left wing. "Bob, what the hell is going on?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice tight, "but I'm about to find out." He keyed the radio, switching to the frequency the fighter pilots had provided. "Viper lead, this is commercial flight 2847. Please clarify your intentions and identify the passenger you're referring to." Static crackled. Then a voice came through, young, male, crisp with military precision, but underlaid with something that sounded almost like reverence. "Commercial Flight 2847, this is Major Ryan Torres, call sign Viper lead, 58th Fighter Squadron out of Nellis Air Force Base. We have confirmed that call sign Widow 6 is aboard your aircraft. Request permission to render full honors." Captain Mitchell exchanged a confused glance with his co-pilot. "Viper lead, we have no military personnel listed on our manifest. No VIPs flagged. Are you certain you have the correct flight?" A pause, then, "Captain, Widow 6 isn't on your VIP list because she doesn't travel as a VIP. She doesn't want the attention. But yes, sir, we are absolutely certain. Passenger Margaret Caldwell, seat 12A, Widow 6. Jennifer was already pulling up the passenger manifest on her tablet, scrolling rapidly. "Here, Margaret Caldwell, age 78, no special designation, no military affiliation listed." Captain Mitchell keyed the radio again. "Viper lead, I'm showing a Margaret Caldwell on board, but there's no indication she's military. Can you confirm her identity?" The fighter pilot's response came faster this time, and his voice carried an edge of disbelief that the captain didn't recognize the name. "Sir, Colonel Margaret Caldwell, United States Air Force, retired. Call sign Widow 6. Combat pilot, Afghanistan Theater 2001 to 2003. She's not just military, Captain, she's a legend." "A legend," Jennifer whispered, her fingers flying across her tablet, searching. The radio crackled again. This time, a different voice, older, deeper, with the unmistakable authority of a senior officer. "Commercial 2847, this is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, flying as Viper 2. Sir, I need you to understand something. Widow 6 flew combat missions when the Air Force was still figuring out how to integrate women into fighter squadrons. She was 54 years old when she deployed to Afghanistan, 54. Do you know what that means?" Captain Mitchell found himself shaking his head, even though they couldn't see him. "No, ma'am. It means she was older than most squadron commanders. It means she'd already buried her husband, a Navy pilot who died in Desert Storm. It means she had every reason to stay home, to retire, to fade away. But when the towers fell on 9/11, she volunteered. She demanded to deploy. And when she got there, she didn't just fly missions, Captain. She became the first female pilot in history to achieve ace status in combat." "Ace status," Jennifer breathed. 5 confirmed kills. 5 enemy aircraft, Colonel Chen confirmed. 2 MiGs, 3 armed helicopters. But that's not why we're here, sir. We're here because of what she did on November 14, 2002. Captain Mitchell's throat felt dry. Through the cockpit window, he could see both F-35s holding their positions with unwavering precision. "What happened on November 14th? Major Torres' voice returned. Her wingman was shot down over the Tora Bora region. Captain James Reeves, 28 years old, father of two. He ejected over enemy territory with Taliban forces converging on his position. Rescue was 47 minutes out. Command ordered Widow 6 to return to base. She was low on fuel, low on ammunition, and intelligence showed multiple enemy fighters in the area. She disobeyed orders, Jennifer guessed. No, ma'am, Torres corrected. She acknowledged the order. Then she switched off her radio and went back. Alone. She circled that pilot for 47 minutes, making gun runs with ammunition she couldn't spare, driving back enemy forces that outnumbered her, keeping them away from Captain Reeves. Captain Mitchell could hear the emotion building in the fighter pilot's voice. Then two MiGs showed up. Syrian supplied, flown by experienced pilots. She was a 56-year-old woman flying a shot-up F-16 with maybe 3 minutes of ammunition left and fuel tanks reading empty. The smart play was to run. The survivable play was to run. But she didn't run, Captain Mitchell said quietly. No, sir. She engaged, alone, against two enemy fighters. She downed both of them, one with her last missile, one by forcing him into a canyon wall through pure flying skill. She stayed overhead until rescue helicopters pulled Captain Reeves out. When she finally landed back at base, her aircraft had 17 bullet holes, one engine was dead, and she touched down with less than 2 minutes of fuel remaining. The cockpit fell silent except for the steady hum of the engines and the whisper of air over the fuselage. Captain Reeves, Colonel Chen's voice came through softly, was my flight instructor at the academy. He's the reason I'm in this cockpit today. He told me that story 100 times. He said Widow 6 didn't save him because of duty or honor or military protocol. She saved him because that's who she was. That's who she is. She couldn't leave a pilot behind. Jennifer wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jesus. Sir, Major Torres continued, every fighter pilot in the Air Force knows the story of Widow 6. We study that mission. We analyze her tactics. We watch the gun camera footage in training. 3 pilots in my squadron are women. They're there because Colonel Caldwell proved it could be done. Not just that women could fly fighters, but that courage doesn't have a gender and heroism doesn't have an age limit. Captain Mitchell looked down at his tablet at the simple entry. Margaret Caldwell, 78, seat 12A. Just an elderly woman. A legend. Viper lead, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Permission granted for honors. Whatever you need to do, you're cleared. Thank you, sir. There's one more thing. Torres paused. Captain Reeves, the pilot she saved. He died 6 years ago, cancer. But before he passed, he made sure every pilot at Nellie's knew the story. He made sure we knew that if we ever found out Widow 6 was flying through our airspace, we honored her. It's tradition now, sir. It's duty. It's respect. Understood, Viper lead. Commercial 2847 will be with you for the next 100 miles. Additional fighters are inbound from Luke Air Force Base. We're going to give her something she'll never forget. Captain Mitchell switched back to the cabin intercom, his hand trembling slightly as he pressed the button. His voice would reach every passenger, including the woman in 12A. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. He paused, collecting himself. It is my profound honor to inform you that we are flying today with Colonel Margaret Caldwell, United States Air Force, retired. Her call sign was Widow 6. She is a combat veteran, a hero, and the first female pilot to achieve A status. The fighters outside our aircraft are here to render honors to her service and sacrifice. He paused again, his voice breaking slightly. On behalf of the flight crew and everyone on this aircraft, Colonel Caldwell, thank you for your service. We are honored to have you aboard. In the cabin below, 300 passengers began to applaud. And in seat 12A, an elderly woman wept. Captain Margaret Maggie Caldwell pushed the F-16's throttle forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as the fighter climbed through 8,000 feet. The Hindu Kush mountains spread below like jagged teeth. their snow-capped peaks piercing through morning clouds. Widow Flight, this is Overlord. We've got movement in Sector 7. Taliban forces repositioning near the Pakistani border. You're cleared to investigate and engage if hostile intent is confirmed. Copy Overlord. Widow 1 acknowledged. That was Captain James Reeves, her wingman, flying 200 yards off her right wing. 28 years old, cocky in the way young pilots always were, but solid, reliable. Widow 6 copies, Maggie responded, her voice calm and steady. After 34 years of flying, very little rattled her anymore. The radio crackled. Hey Widow 6, when we get back, drinks are on me. Karen's birthday is next week and I promised her a video call. Try not to make us late, okay? Maggie smiled inside her oxygen mask. I'll do my best, Reeves. Keep it tight on me. Intel says this area is hot. Always do, ma'am, always do. They were an odd pair, she knew that. The squadron had whispered when she'd arrived. A 54-year-old woman, a widow, flying combat missions with pilots young enough to be her children. Some resented her presence. Others thought she was a publicity stunt. But Reeves had been different. He judged her on skill alone, and when she'd outflown him in a training exercise, he'd bought her a beer and asked her to teach him the maneuver. They'd been flying together for 8 months now, a lifetime in combat terms. Widow Flight, Overlord. Drone feed shows approximately 40 hostiles in a compound at Grid, November 7, 3215. They're setting up heavy weapons. You are cleared hot. Copy Overlord. Widow 1 is in hot. Maggie watched as Reeves's F-16 rolled inverted and dove, dropping toward the target like a hawk. Her job was to stay high, maintain oversight, watch for threats he couldn't see while focused on his attack run. She scanned the sky clear. Her radar showed nothing. The mission was textbook. Reeves's voice came through. Widow 1 target acquired, ORD. The explosion was visible even from Maggie's altitude, a brilliant orange flash followed by black smoke, not from the ground, from Reeves's aircraft. Surface 2 air, Surface 2 air, Reeves's voice screamed through the radio, no longer calm, pure survival instinct. I'm hit, I'm hit. Maggie's heart froze, but her hands moved with practiced precision, banking hard, diving toward her wingman. Reeves, talk to me. What's your status? I've got fire in the engine bay, hydraulics failing, I can't, the stick's not responding. Eject now. She watched helpless as the F-16 spiraled downward, trailing smoke and flame. At 3,000 feet, the canopy blew away, and a split second later the ejection seat fired, rocketing Reeves clear of the dying aircraft. The F-16 smashed into a mountainside and exploded. Reeves's parachute blossomed, a tiny white flower against the brown mountains. Overlord, this is Widow 6. Widow 1 is down. Pilot ejected successfully. I have visual on his chute. Coordinates November 7, 3248. Copy Widow 6. The controller's voice was tense. Combat search and rescue is spinning up now. Estimate 45 minutes to your location. 45 minutes. Maggie watched Reeves drift toward Earth. Even from altitude, she could see hostile forces moving, vehicles, personnel, all converging on the landing zone. Overlord, I've got enemy forces moving toward the crash site. Multiple vehicles. They'll reach him in less than 10 minutes. Widow 6, you are ordered to maintain high cover and await CSAR. Do not engage. Your fuel state won't support extended operations. Maggie checked her gauges. Fuel was at 50%, enough to get home with reserves. Ammunition, 400 rounds of 20 cannon shells, 1 Sidewinder missile. Against 40 enemy fighters, and whatever surface-to-air capability had just knocked down Reeves. Reeves hit the ground hard, his parachute collapsing around him. Even from altitude, Maggie could see him struggling to free himself, could see the dust from approaching vehicles. She thought of Karen, Reeves's wife. She thought of his two daughters, 5 and 7 years old. She thought of her own husband, Tom, shot down over Iraq 11 years ago. She remembered the officers at her door, the folded flag, the empty chair at Christmas. Overlord Widow 6, say again your last. Widow 6, you are ordered to return to base. CSAR will handle extraction. Acknowledge. Maggie watched a technical, a pickup truck with a mounted machine gun, crest a ridge, racing toward Reeves. She thought of Tom. She thought of those little girls. She made her choice. Overlord, you're breaking up. Repeat last transmission. Widow 6, I said. Maggie switched off her radio and pushed the stick forward. The F-16 dropped like a stone, air screaming over the canopy as she dove. Her targeting computer painted the technical range closing fast. At 1,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The 20 cannon roared to life. Tracer rounds arced downward, walking toward the truck. The vehicle exploded in a shower of metal and flame. MAGGI, I'm here. Reeves's voice burst through on the emergency frequency. They're everywhere. I see them, Jimmy, I see them. Stay down, help is coming. Another technical appeared. She banked hard, lined up, fired. The truck disintegrated. Her ammunition counter dropped, 320 rounds remaining. More vehicles, more fighters pouring out of the compound. She made another pass, scattering them with cannon fire, buying time, buying precious minutes. 280 rounds. Her radar screamed suddenly, airborne contacts, 2 of them fast movers. Oh no, she whispered. 2 MiG-21 fighters appeared from behind a mountain ridge, afterburners glowing. Syrian supplied, professional pilots coming straight for her. 240 rounds of ammunition left, 1 Sidewinder missile, fuel dropping into the yellow. She could run. She could break off, go supersonic, outrun them back to friendly airspace. Below, Reeves huddled behind a rock, enemy forces closing in. 43 minutes until rescue. Maggie armed her missile, checked her 6 and turned toward the MiGs. Not today, she growled. Not on my watch. The lead MiG fired first, a heat-seeking missile streaking toward her. Maggie dumped flares and dove into a canyon, the missile detonating harmlessly behind her. The MiGs followed, splitting up, trying to box her in. They were younger, faster, better equipped. But she was a widow who'd already lost everything that mattered. She had nothing left to fear. And that made her the most dangerous pilot in the sky. The first MiG screamed past Maggie's canopy so close she could see the Syrian Air Force insignia on its fuselage. Her F-16 shuddered in its wake, pulled by the turbulence of its passage. "Come on, you bastards," she muttered, yanking the stick hard right, pulling 7 GS. Her vision tunneled at the edges, gray creeping in, but she'd been pulling GS since before these pilots were born. She knew exactly how far she could push. The canyon walls blurred past on either side, jagged rock reaching up like claws. The MiGs had altitude advantage, speed advantage, numbers advantage. They should have had her cold. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd followed her into the canyon. Her radar warning receiver screamed, missile lock. The second MiG above and behind had fired. Maggie didn't think, didn't hesitate. 34 years of flying compressed into pure instinct. She rolled inverted, pulled hard on the stick, and dove. The missile corkscrewed past, confused by the sudden maneuver and the canyon walls interfering with its seeker head. It impacted rock with a thunderous explosion that showered her aircraft with debris. Warning lights flashed on her panel, minor damage to the left stabilizer. Nothing critical, not yet. The lead MiG pulled up, trying to gain altitude for another pass. Maggie stayed low, hugging the terrain, using the mountains as cover. Her mind calculated angles, speeds, fuel burn, ammunition count. 217 rounds left. 1 Sidewinder missile. Fuel at 38% and dropping. The clock in her head ticked down, 39 minutes until rescue reached Reeves. She couldn't keep this up for 39 minutes. She'd be out of fuel in 20, out of ammunition in 10 if the fight stayed hot. She had to end this, fast. "Widow 6, what the hell are you doing?" The radio crackled. Someone had overridden her shutoff. "We've got you on satellite. Break off now." She ignored them. The second MiG dropped low, trying to cut her off. He was good, smooth, aggressive, making textbook moves. In any other circumstance, she might have admired his flying. But he was trying to kill her, and if she died, Reeves died. Karen would get that knock on the door. Those little girls would grow up without a father. Not happening. Maggie pulled up suddenly, climbing vertical, the F-16's engine screaming. The MiG followed, matching her, both aircraft clawing for altitude. Her airspeed dropped, 300 knots, 200, 150. The MiG pilot was smart. He stayed with her, knowing she'd stall first, knowing he could hammer her when she fell out of the sky. But Maggie wasn't planning to stall. At the apex of the climb, with her airspeed bleeding toward zero, she kicked the rudder hard left and chopped the throttle. The F-16 snap-rolled, trading every ounce of remaining energy for position. For one impossible moment, she hung in the sky, nose pointed straight down at the MiG that had been behind her. The other pilot's eyes went wide. She was close enough to see his face through his canopy, to see the moment he realized he'd been suckered. She fired. The Sidewinder leapt from the rail, riding a column of white smoke. At this range, less than 1,000 feet, the MiG pilot had no chance. The missile slammed into his tail section and detonated. The aircraft came apart like a child's toy, pieces tumbling toward the valley floor. No ejection, no parachute. Maggie felt nothing, couldn't afford to feel anything. One down. One to go. 198 rounds remaining. Her F-16 fell toward Earth in a controlled dive. She added power, leveled out, went back to terrain-hugging altitude. The remaining MiG was somewhere above her, hunting her. "Maggie," Reeves's voice panicked. "They're right on top of me. I can see them. Maybe 30 seconds. Hold on, Jimmy, hold on." She couldn't fight the MiG and protect Reeves at the same time. She had to choose. Not a choice at all, really. Maggie broke from the canyon, climbing into open sky, exposing herself, making herself the target. The MiG took the bait. He dove from above, cannon already firing, tracer rounds reaching for her like burning fingers. She jinked left, then right, but several rounds punched through her left wing. More warning lights, hydraulic pressure dropping. The stick felt mushy, less responsive. She had maybe 5 minutes before the aircraft became unflyable. The MiG flashed past, already pulling into a climbing turn for another pass. He knew he had her, knew she was damaged, knew it was only a matter of time. But time was the one thing Maggie couldn't give him. She checked her position. They were directly over Reeves now. Below, she could see enemy fighters surrounding his position, AK-47s raised. 36 minutes until rescue. She looked at her fuel gauge. 15 minutes of flying time left, maybe 10 with combat maneuvering. The MiG was coming back around, lining up for the killing shot. Maggie made a decision that violated every rule of air combat, every instinct of self-preservation. She dove. Straight down. Full throttle. The F-16 screamed toward Earth, airspeed climbing past 500 knots, past 600. The canyon she just left rushed up to meet her. The MiG followed, probably confused, probably thinking she'd lost her mind. He wasn't entirely wrong. At 800 feet above the canyon floor, she pulled back on the stick with everything she had. The G-forces slammed into her like a physical blow. 8GS-9, her vision graying out completely. The F-16 groaned, metal screaming in protest. The canyon wall was right there, impossibly close, a vertical face of solid rock. She leveled out with 50 feet to spare. Behind her, the MiG pilot pulled out of his dive a fraction of a second too late. His wingtip caught the canyon wall. The MiG cartwheeled, disintegrating across 1,000 feet of rock face. The explosion lit up the canyon like a sunrise. Maggie gasped for breath, her flight suit soaked with sweat, her hands trembling on the stick. 2 kills, both MiGs down. But she wasn't done. She pulled up, circling back to Reeves's position. The enemy fighters below were scattering, terrified by the burning wreckage falling around them. "Overlord, this is Widow 6, her voice was ragged. "Hostile aircraft neutralized. I'm back on station over the downed pilot. Where's my rescue?" "Widow 6, the controller's voice was filled with disbelief. Did you just down 2 MiGs?" "Overlord," I asked, "where's my rescue?" 34 minutes out. "Widow 6, your fuel." "I'll make it work. I'm not leaving him." She had maybe 8 minutes of fuel left. She'd burn every last drop before she abandoned Reeves. Below, the enemy regrouped. More vehicles appeared. Maggie made another low pass, her cannon barking, scattering them again. 156 rounds. Another pass, another scattering. 97 rounds. Her fuel gauge flickered into the red. 5 minutes, maybe less. "Maggie, get out of here," Reeves screamed. "You're going to die." "Shut up, Jimmy. I'm not leaving you. I promised Corinne I'd bring you home." She made another pass. The cannon fired in short, precise bursts. 43 rounds. Fuel critical. 3 minutes. "Rescue BIRDS inbound, 60 seconds. Overlord's voice urgent. Maggie looked up. 2 U-60 Blackhawks appeared over the ridge, flying fast and low, door gunners already firing. "Jimmy, your ride's here. Get ready to move." The helicopters dropped into the valley. Reeves sprinted from cover, running full speed. Hands reached down, hauling him aboard. The Blackhawks lifted off immediately, banking away. "Widow 6 pilot recovered. RTB immediately. You're on fumes." Maggie turned her F-16 north toward home. Her fuel gauge read 0. The engine coughed once. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "Just a little further." The engine coughed again, sputtered, died. Suddenly her fighter was a glider. No power, no hydraulics, just momentum and gravity. The base was 12 miles away. She had one chance. Afghanistan 2002 continued. Maggie's F-16 glided through the air like a 16-ton bird with clipped wings. No engine, no hydraulics, just altitude, airspeed, and 34 years of flying experience between her and death. The dead stick landing, every pilot's nightmare. "Widow 6, we've got you on radar. Glide slope looks good. Runway is clear. Emergency crews standing by." The tower controller's voice was steady, professional, but she could hear the tension underneath. 12 miles. She had 12 miles to glide. Her hands moved across the cockpit, securing systems, preparing for impact. The stick felt heavy, manual reversion, no power assist. Every input took physical strength. Her arms already ached from the dogfight. 10 miles. The base appeared in the distance, a cluster of buildings and tents against brown mountains. The runway looked impossibly small from this altitude. 8 miles. She was too high, burning altitude too slowly. She'd overshoot the runway. Maggie rolled into a steep bank, starting to bleed off excess altitude. The F-16 responded sluggishly, fighting her. Without hydraulics, the flight controls felt like moving concrete. 6 miles. Sweat poured down her face inside the helmet. Her arms burned. But she'd landed gliders before, decades ago, when she was young and the world was different. Some things you never forget. 4 miles, 2,000 feet of altitude. The glide slope looked good now. She had one shot at this. No go-around, no second chance. "Widow 6, you are cleared to land. Winds calm. runway 27. 2 miles, 1,000 feet. She could see people lining the runway, ground crews, pilots, everyone watching. The emergency vehicles paced her, lights flashing. 1 mile, 500 feet. The runway numbers appeared, huge white digits painted on concrete. She adjusted her angle, feeling the aircraft respond with agonizing slowness. 200 feet. 100 feet. The ground rushed up. She pulled back on the stick with everything she had, flaring the nose up, killing the descent rate. The main wheels kissed the runway with a screech of rubber. The nose gear dropped. She was down. But without hydraulics, she had no brakes. The F-16 rolled down the runway, refusing to stop. The end of the concrete approached, desert beyond, rocks and sand. Maggie yanked the emergency brake. Nothing. She steered hard right, running off the runway onto the dirt taxiway. The aircraft bounced, shuddered, finally grinding to a halt in a cloud of dust. Silence. Then the radio exploded with voices. Emergency vehicles surrounded her. The canopy opened. Hands reached up to help her out. Her legs collapsed when her feet hit the ground. 2 crew chiefs caught her, lowered her gently to the dirt. Ma'am, are you injured? Maggie shook her head, unable to speak. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. A Humvee skidded to a stop. The door flew open and James Reeves jumped out, still in his flight suit, his face blackened with smoke and dust. He ran toward her, dropped to his knees. Maggie, oh God, Maggie. She grabbed his arm. You okay? Are you hurt? Am I hurt? Am I hurt? He laughed, a sound edged with hysteria. Maggie, you just, he couldn't finish. He pulled her into a fierce embrace. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Over his shoulder, Maggie saw the crowd gathering, 50 people, 100 more, pilots, ground crew, officers, all staring at her. All silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping, cheering, shouting her name. She didn't remember much of what happened next. Medics checking her over. The squadron commander's hand on her shoulder. The intelligence officer asking for her report. Someone pressing a bottle of water into her hands. What she remembered was the phone call 2 days later. Reeves's wife, Karen, sobbing on the other end of the line. Thank you for bringing him home. Thank you for bringing him home to his girls. That made it worth it. All of it. Present day, Flight 2847. The memory faded as Maggie felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. She blinked, returning to the present, to the commercial airliner at 35,000 feet. The flight attendant stood beside her seat, tears streaming down her face. Colonel Caldwell, would you like some water? Anything at all? I'm fine, dear, thank you. But she wasn't fine. The cabin had transformed around her. Every passenger who could see her was staring, some with awe, some with tears in their eyes. The businessman in 12B had closed his laptop completely, turned toward her, his expensive suit suddenly making him look small and insignificant. Ma'am, he stammered, I am so sorry. Earlier I barely acknowledged you. I assumed. That I was just an old woman. Maggie's smile held no bitterness. I am just an old woman. That was 30 years ago. Another lifetime. No, the Marine veteran from 3 rows back had moved closer, standing in the aisle at attention. Ma'am, with respect, you're not just anything. I studied your mission at Camp Lejeune. We all did. Every branch studies Widow 6. You're a legend. Legends are for young people, Maggie said softly. I'm just someone who did her job. A woman across the aisle leaned forward, her voice choked with emotion. My brother is an F-16 pilot. He has a picture of you in his locker. He says you're the reason he enlisted. He says you proved that courage isn't about age or size or gender. It's about heart. Maggie's throat tightened. She hadn't realized, hadn't known that the mission, that impossible, terrifying day, had meant something beyond just saving one life. The college student in 12C held up his phone. Colonel, there are videos online. Historians breaking down your dogfight, fighter pilots analyzing your tactics. You're studied at the Air Force Academy, Top Gun, every military flight school in NATO. I didn't know, Maggie whispered. Outside the window, the F-35 still held formation, their presence a reminder that she wasn't forgotten, would never be forgotten. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, appeared beside the Marine, her mother's hand on her shoulder. She held a napkin and a pen, eyes wide with wonder. Miss Colonel, can I have your autograph? I want to be a pilot when I grow up. Mommy says girls can do anything. Maggie's vision blurred. She took the napkin with trembling hands. What's your name, sweetheart? Emma. Maggie wrote carefully, to Emma, the sky is waiting for you, reach for it. Call Margaret Caldwell, widow 6. She handed it back. The little girl clutched it like treasure. The flight attendant's radio crackled. She listened, her eyes widening, then looked at Maggie. Colonel, the pilots are asking. They want to know if you'd be willing to come to the cockpit. They'd like to meet you. Maggie nodded, her voice lost. As she stood slowly, her old bones protesting, every passenger in sight rose with her. The cabin fell into absolute silence. The Marine veteran saluted sharply, then the businessman, then others who'd served. Maggie returned the salute, her hand shaking. She walked down the aisle toward the cockpit, and as she passed each row, passengers stood. Some reached out to touch her hand. Some simply watched with tears in their eyes. Some saluted. A standing ovation at 35,000 feet. For the elderly woman in the worn cardigan. For the warrior who'd refused to let a brother fall. For widow 6, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Robert Mitchell turned in his seat. He'd been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years, had transported presidents and celebrities and foreign dignitaries. None of that had prepared him for this moment. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her silver hair slightly disheveled, her cardigan wrinkled from hours of sitting. She looked small, fragile, ordinary. Then she met his eyes and he saw it, something beneath the weathered exterior. Steel, fire, the unmistakable bearing of a warrior. Colonel Caldwell, he said, his voice thick. It's an honor, ma'am. Captain, she nodded, moving carefully into the tight space. You have a beautiful aircraft. She handles well, I imagine. First Officer Jennifer Hayes laughed, a sound caught between tears and joy. Ma'am, you just complimented a Boeing 737 after flying F-16s in combat. That's incredibly gracious. Maggie smiled. Any aircraft that brings people home safely deserves respect. Captain Mitchell gestured to the center console. Would you like to sit, Colonel? We have. The radio crackled, cutting him off. Commercial 2847, this is Viper Lead. Ma'am, if you're in the cockpit, I'd like to speak with you directly. Mitchell handed Maggie the headset. Her hands shook as she placed it over her ears, adjusting the microphone. It had been 20 years since she'd worn a headset in a military cockpit. Viper Lead, this is Widow 6. Her voice cracked. It's been a long time since I've used that call sign. Ma'am, it's an honor to share airspace with you. Major Tor's voice carried reverence that transcended rank. We have a surprise for you. Look left. Maggie pressed her face to the cockpit window. 2 more F-35s had joined formation, 4 fighters now, positioned perfectly around the commercial airliner. They flew with breathtaking precision, their stealth fighters catching sunlight like silver arrows. Luke Air Force Base sends their respects, ma'am, Torres continued. But we're not done yet, look right. 2 more fighters appeared from the east, sliding into formation with fluid grace. 6 F-35s now surrounded them, the most advanced fighters in the American arsenal, flying escort for an elderly woman on a commercial flight. Nellie's Air Force Base, ma'am. Every pilot here knows the story of Widow 6. Tears streamed down Maggie's face. She couldn't speak. Colonel Caldwell, A new voice came through, female, strong, professional. "This is Captain Sarah Rivera flying as Viper 4. Ma'am, I was 10 years old when I read about you in a library book. My father said women couldn't be fighter pilots. That book proved him wrong. I'm here because of you." "Captain Rivera," Maggie managed, I'm so proud of you." "The honor is ours, ma'am." Behind Maggie, the cockpit door had opened again. Flight attendants crowded the entrance, watching. Beyond them, passengers pressed into the aisles, straining to see. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen's voice joined the frequency. "Colonel, I need you to know something. Captain James Reeves, the pilot you saved, he was my flight instructor at the academy. He passed away 6 years ago, but before he died, he made us promise something." Maggie's breath caught. "Jimmy's gone." "Yes, ma'am, cancer. But he lived 20 more years because of you. He saw his daughters graduate college. He walked them both down the aisle at their weddings. He held his grandchildren. He had 20 years he wouldn't have had without you." Maggie pressed her hand over her mouth, sobbing quietly. "He made us promise," Chen continued, her voice breaking, "that if we ever found out you were flying through our airspace, we'd honor you. We'd show you that the sacrifice you made mattered, that it still matters." "We're going to do something for you now, ma'am," Major Torres said. "We're going to perform a missing man formation. It's reserved for the fallen, for the heroes, for the legends. You've earned it 1,000 times over." Captain Mitchell flipped a switch, patching the radio through to the cabin speakers. Every passenger would hear this. "All Viper elements, this is Viper lead. Prepare for missing man on my mark. Widow 6, this is for you, for Captain Reeves, for your husband Tom, for every pilot who didn't make it home, for everyone you saved and everyone who flies because you showed them how." The 6 F-35s tightened their formation, drawing closer to the commercial airliner. Through the cockpit windows, Maggie could see the pilots, some waving, some saluting, all honoring her presence. "Execute missing man, mark." 5 fighters held their position, steady and true. The 6th Viper 4, Captain Rivera, lit her afterburner. The F-35 climbed vertically, a column of pure thrust and fire rocketing toward the heavens. It climbed and climbed, leaving an empty space in the formation. The missing man, the empty chair, the unfinished mission. The symbol of those who'd fallen. In the cabin, passengers pressed against windows, watching the fighter climb until it became a silver speck against the blue. Many wept openly. Veterans saluted. Parents held their children up to see. The Marine veteran's voice carried from the cabin, "Honor to the fallen, honor to Widow 6. The cabin erupted, "Honor to Widow 6, honor to Widow 6. 300 voices, chanting in unison. Maggie collapsed into the observer seat, her body racked with sobs. Jennifer reached over, gripping her hand. Captain Mitchell's shoulders shook as he wiped his eyes. "Colonel Caldwell," Major Torres said softly, "we need to return to base now. But know this, every pilot in these jets, every pilot at our bases, every pilot in training, we all fly in your shadow. We stand on your shoulders. You showed us that courage has no age, no gender, no limits. You showed us what it means to refuse to leave a pilot behind." The 5 remaining F-35s began to peel away, one by one, each pilot rocking their wings as they departed, the aerial salute, the warriors' goodbye. "Widow 6, Tor's voice came one last time, "thank you for your service. Thank you for showing us the way. We have the watch now, ma'am, you can rest." The last fighter departed, climbing into the sun. Maggie sat in the cockpit, the headset still on, surrounded by 2 commercial pilots and a gathering crowd of flight attendants and passengers. Her cardigan was stained with tears. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her heart felt too big for her chest. "I was just doing my job," she whispered. "No, ma'am," Captain Mitchell said, his voice filled with awe. "You were being a hero, there's a difference." The cockpit door fully opened now. The cabin beyond was standing, every passenger on their feet applauding. The sound was deafening. hands clapping, voices cheering, a standing ovation that wouldn't stop. For an elderly woman. For a legend. For Widow 6, the Boeing 737 touched down with the gentlest of kisses, Captain Mitchell's finest landing in years. He'd wanted it to be perfect. For her. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, he made one final announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we've arrived at Washington Dulles. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate. Colonel Caldwell, on behalf of the entire crew and every passenger on this aircraft, thank you. You've reminded us what true courage looks like. We are honored to have flown with you today. The cabin erupted in applause one final time. Maggie sat in her seat, exhausted, emotionally spent. The businessman in 12B stood, extending his hand. Colonel, I'll never forget this flight, never forget you. Thank you for your service. She shook his hand, managing a tired smile. Thank you for listening to an old woman's story. You're not old, ma'am, you're timeless. The aircraft reached the gate. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but nobody moved. Every passenger remained seated, watching Maggie. The lead flight attendant appeared beside her. Colonel, there are some people waiting for you at the gate. They've asked if you'd be willing to deplane first. Maggie's heart raced. Who? You'll see, ma'am. With effort, Maggie stood. Her knees protested, her back ached, but she straightened her cardigan and lifted her chin. Old habits, military bearing never quite left you. She walked down the aisle one final time. As she passed each row, passengers stood, some saluting, some simply placing hands over hearts. The little girl, Emma, held up her autographed napkin like a trophy. The Marine veteran stood at rigid attention until she passed. The jetway felt longer than it should have been. Each step echoed. Her worn shoes squeaked slightly on the industrial carpet. Through the window, she could see the terminal, normal, crowded, full of people rushing to connections and reunions. She emerged into the gate area and stopped. 3 women stood in a line, dressed in Air Force Service dress uniforms, their blues sharp and crisp, medals gleaming on their chests, fighter pilot wings above their ribbons. Each stood at perfect attention. Behind them, at least 30 more people, pilots in flight suits, veterans in jackets covered with patches, airport employees who'd heard something special was happening, travelers who'd been told to wait. The youngest of the 3 women stepped forward. She was maybe 30, Hispanic, with fierce dark eyes and the confident bearing of someone who'd fought for every inch of altitude. Colonel Margaret Caldwell, Calling Widow 6. Her voice rang out clear and strong. Permission to approach, ma'am. Maggie's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. The young woman took 3 steps forward and saluted. Maggie returned it, her hand steadier now. Ma'am, I'm Captain Sarah Rivera, 58th Fighter Squadron, currently assigned to the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base. I wanted to meet you in person. I needed to tell you. Her voice cracked slightly. Ma'am, I joined the Air Force because of you. Captain Rivera, Please, ma'am, let me finish. Sarah's eyes glistened. I was 10 years old, growing up in a small town in Texas. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college, but I found a book in the library about women in combat, and there was a chapter about you, about Widow 6, about the 56-year-old woman who refused to leave her wingman behind. Maggie's vision blurred. That chapter changed my life. I realized that being a fighter pilot wasn't about being the biggest or the strongest or fitting some stereotype. It was about heart, about courage, about refusing to quit when everything says you should. Sarah stepped closer. Ma'am, I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. I graduated top of my class at the academy. I've flown combat missions in Syria and Iraq. I have 2 confirmed kills. And every single time I strap into that cockpit, I think of you. I think of Widow 6. I think, what would she do? Maggie pulled the young woman into a fierce embrace. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. So incredibly proud. The second officer stepped forward, an African-American woman, tall and lean, with Lieutenant Colonel insignia. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Jasmine Washington. I flew with Captain Reeves before he died. He told me the story of November 14th at least 100 times. He said you gave him 20 extra years of life. He made me promise to thank you if I ever got the chance." She saluted. "On behalf of Captain Reeves, his daughters, his grandchildren, and everyone who loved him, thank you, Colonel. Thank you for bringing him home." The third pilot, a woman in her 40s with captain's bars, spoke next. "Colonel, I'm Captain Michelle Torres, Major Ryan Torres' older sister. My little brother was Viper lead today. When he heard you were on that flight, he called me crying. He said, 'Michelle, I get to honor Widow 6. I get to show her that her sacrifice mattered.' Ma'am, you've inspired generations of pilots. My brother, me, these women, hundreds more." Maggie looked at the three of them, representing different backgrounds, different paths, but united by the same wings, the same calling, the same sky she'd once owned. "I never wanted to be an inspiration," she said softly. "I just wanted to bring Jimmy home." "That's exactly why you are one," Sarah said. "Because you didn't do it for glory or recognition. You did it because it was right, because that's who you are." From the crowd, someone started clapping. Then everyone, pilots, veterans, airport staff, travelers who'd stopped to watch. The applause filled the terminal, echoing off the high ceilings. Maggie stood surrounded by noise and love and respect, but her mind drifted to her purpose for this trip. "I need to go," she said quietly to Sarah. "I have an appointment." Sarah nodded, understanding without explanation. "May we escort you, ma'am?" Vietnam Veterans Memorial, 1847 hours. The sun hung low over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The three Air Force officers walked slightly behind Maggie as she approached the black granite wall that stretched across the National Mall. The wall, that's what veterans called it. 58,000 names etched in stone. 58,000 lives ended too soon. Maggie's feet knew the way. She'd made this pilgrimage every year for 33 years. Panel 3W, line 47. Her fingers traced the engraved letters. Thomas Michael Caldwell. "Hi, Tom," she whispered, pressing her palm against his name. "I brought some friends this year." Behind her, the three pilots stood at attention, saluting the wall, honoring the fallen. "Tom, you'd be so proud," Maggie continued, tears flowing freely now. "These women, they're doing what we always dreamed about. They're flying. They're fighting. They're proving that the sky belongs to anyone brave enough to reach for it." She pulled out the faded photograph. Tom in his flight suit, arm around her, both young and alive and full of dreams. "I miss you every day, but today I felt you with me. When those F-35s flew alongside us, when those pilots honored what we did. I felt you in the cockpit beside me, Tom, just like old times." Sarah stepped forward gently. "Ma'am, was he a pilot too?" "Navy," Maggie said, pride cutting through grief. F-4 Phantom, shot down over Iraq in 1991. He ejected but was captured, died in captivity before the war ended. She touched the name again. "I became a pilot because of him. I fought because of him. And when I saved Jimmy Reeves, I was saving Tom too, saving the pilot who never made it home." The four women stood before the wall as daylight faded. 4 generations of warriors, bound by service, by sacrifice, by the unbreakable code that pilots never leave pilots behind. "Colonel," Michelle said softly, "what you did in Afghanistan, you changed the Air Force. You changed the military. You changed the world." Maggie shook her head. "I was just an old widow who refused to quit, nothing special." "No, ma'am," Sarah said firmly. You are extraordinary. You flew when they said you were too old. You fought when they said you were too female. You saved a life when they said you should run. You proved that heroism doesn't have an age limit or a gender or a size requirement. It just requires heart." Maggie turned from the wall, looking at the three pilots. In their eyes, she saw herself at 20, at 30, at 56. She saw the next chapter of the story she'd helped write. "The sky is yours now," she said. "Fly well, fly safe, and never ever leave a pilot behind." "No, ma'am," they said in unison. "Never." As darkness fell over the memorial, Maggie Caldwell, widow, warrior, legend, walked slowly away from the wall. Her steps were those of an elderly woman, but she walked with the quiet strength of someone who'd once owned the sky. Behind her, etched in stone, her husband's name caught the last light of day. Above her, somewhere in the gathering darkness, jets trained for the next mission, flown by pilots who knew her name. And in Seat 12A of flights all across America, elderly women sat quietly, unremarkable to the world around them, carrying stories that would make the bravest souls weep. Some heroes wear uniforms. Some heroes fly fighters. Some heroes just refuse to let courage die with age. Maggie Caldwell was all three. Widow 6 had landed, but her legacy would fly forever.